Okay, our second presentation award actually goes to our keynote speaker. And our keynote speaker is Randy Udall. And I'm going to let him sort of give a bit of his background, which I'm sure he'll do himself anyway. But I met Randy, I don't know how many years ago I met Randy out in Colorado, first of all, and then subsequently we have brought him here to Wisconsin to speak in the past. And Randy's sort of a very impressive person from my perspective because he's walking the talk. And besides being our keynote, I consider him to be a fairly exemplary Earth citizen. He lives with a 2.2 kW PV array, grid-tied, one of the first in Colorado, solar hot water heating system. You know, the entire family has been coerced into turning off lights and to conserving electricity as best they can. And that's the type of citizen, that's the type of person, hopefully, that we're all trying to become as we come here and learn at the MRE, the fair. So, Randy, you're on.
It's a pleasure to be here in Wisconsin. Can you hear in the back? Is this sound system okay? Way back
Randy,
there?
can you pull the mic up a little closer, please?
A bit higher?
Yeah, and then tip it in toward you. Just tip it in. There you go.
How's that? Is that okay in the back?
Randy, just a little bit about CORE and what you do.
Okay.
Thank you.
I run a nonprofit energy office in western Colorado. It's called CORE. We get some funding from local utilities and local governments. We also get some grant money from people like the Turner Foundation. We have been trying in our valley to sort of accelerate an energy transition that we think is inevitable towards more efficient energy use and a much greater proportion of renewable energy being used in our valley and across the nation. This has not been easy, but it's been a dream job in many ways for me because it's enabled me to learn a lot about energy issues, to really study and analyze what's going on. And it's a confusing picture. Someone once said, well, if you're not confused, you really don't understand what's going on. And that's kind of the way I feel about energy issues right now in the United States. Our local utilities now are leading the nation in the amount of wind power they're buying as a percentage of their wholesale power purchases. We, a few years ago, started a tax where we tax very large homes that want to use more energy than our energy code permits. If they want to snow melt their driveway or have an outdoor heated swimming pool, we tax them. And we thought that this tax might raise $100,000 a year, but it's raised $2 million in the last 3 years. So the Denver Post kind of ran an article about it, calling me the Robin Hood of Aspen. And we've done interesting things with that money. We bought some rainforest in Brazil. We put solar hot water systems on affordable housing complexes. We're buying lots of wind power. We upgraded the mechanical systems in our new high school, on and on and on. And about half that money we still haven't spent yet. We're just experimenting with lots of different things that need to happen and seeing what's most cost effective and what's the best thing to do. This group CORE, we give the only solar incentives right now that are available in Colorado, and we pay 25 cents a kilowatt hour for all the electricity that grid-tied photovoltaic systems make in our area. Whether the owner uses it or whether it goes back into the grid, we pay them for 4 years that fee. These things sound quite radical, you know, but as I read about what's happening in the energy world, the United States is really a long way behind. There are more than 50 cities in Europe now where you can get a solar incentive just like the ones I described. And some of them are for 50 cents or 60 cents a kilowatt hour and last for 20 years. I took this journey yesterday, and it seems very banal and just sort of common common, but let me just tell you about it. I drove down to Denver the night before last and spent a night with a friend there, and then I got on a plane yesterday and flew 1,200 miles, rented a car in Appleton and drove 60 or 65 miles over here, spent the night here. You know, this is the world we're living in now, where a journey like that, which would have taken 6 weeks or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months 150 years ago, we now make in a day and bitch about the plane food. You know, we're living in a really remarkable time in human history. And before the next train comes by, I want you to kind of join me in going backwards just briefly for a moment. Because I think it's really important for Americans to understand about our energy future. We need to understand some more about our energy past. And ask this question, how did we get here? So, for most of human history, as you know, people have been living off of renewable energy. It's nothing new. They've been harvesting sunlight with goats or grass or cattle or sheep, and they've been cooking on wood. I mean, that's the human story for tens of thousands of years. And in that world, our world is so dominated by machines now that I think it's very difficult for any of us to envision a world that was run by muscle. Okay? Muscle was running the world for tens of thousands of years. So now we have a human demonstration. Would you please stand up, sir? Okay. We've got, okay, take off your shirt. I want to, this gentleman's been selected to show you some muscle. Okay? Once more. Okay. Now, knowing he was pretty puny, I asked another gentleman here to really show us the real deal here, okay? And he's kind of shy, but take that t-shirt off, show us the real thing here, okay? I want you guys to see what muscle can do. All right, now, give us a pose. Okay, turn around. Okay. Thank you, thank you. An average human being can do about 100 watts worth of work, okay? That's equal to about one of these solar panels you'll see out here on a pole, okay? 100 watts worth of work. And that's how we used to run the world, with human muscle, and an ox can do 300 or 400 watts worth of work. And a large horse, one of these big, huge Belgian horses, could do a horsepower's worth of work, or about 750 watts worth of work. Now, this world that was run by muscle, you don't need me to tell you that men weren't doing most of the human work. Most of the human work was being provided by women. So I've asked a couple of women to stand up. Okay. While women were doing the work, what were the men doing? Everybody asked me that, and and I just say, well, they were trying to figure out how to make beer. And once they did that, they wanted to figure out how to play football and rugby and soccer and all those analogs, and the end result of that is Super Bowl Sunday. So that's what men have contributed. In a book about Lewis and Clark, the historian Stephen Ambrose wrote, and he's writing about 1800. Okay, so let's go back to 1800. Nothing moved faster than the speed of a horse. No human being, no manufactured item, no bushel of wheat, no side of beef, no letter, no information, no idea, no order or instruction moved faster. Nothing ever had moved any faster, and most people thought nothing ever would. 1800, let's think about 1800 a minute. White people really had just been here, 30 or 40, 50, 60, 80 years, something like that. So let's think about Europe for a minute. The most powerful machine in Europe in 1800 was about a 10 or 15 or 20 kilowatt wind or water mill. There were lots of them scattered around Europe, in England and Denmark and Netherlands and Germany. So 10 or 15 kilowatts. All right? Now, we have a minivan over here, okay, and we have another 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 cars in the parking lot, I'm not sure which. Under the hood of a typical American automobile now, you have an engine of 150 horsepower. It's about 125 kilowatts. It's 10 to 15 times more powerful than the most powerful machine in Europe was 200 years ago. And again, this seems normal to us, customary to us, so that when we get in a car, we don't think to ourselves, we don't think back to Cleopatra, whose idea of a great time was to get 60 guys like this guy and go up and down the Nile, right? Have them row her up and down the Nile. 60 men at 100 watts is about 6 horsepower, 6 kilowatts of power. It's pathetic. It's nothing. So a typical American woman now, or an American man or a teenager, who gets in a car is, in an energy sense, 25 times richer than Cleopatra ever thought she would be. We are drowning in this stuff. We're so enormously blessed that our blessings have turned into curses in kind of a weird way. And most Americans are so disenfranchised, or so kind of, nobody really computes this anymore. Energy is a gift that we've had because we were born in a very rich nation in an energy sense with lots of fossil fuels, and we've begun taking this stuff totally for granted. By 1850, the Industrial Revolution was getting up ahead of steam, railroads are spreading, but animals were still doing most of the work in the United States. In Appleton, last time I was there, I was astonished. I went for a walk downtown along the Fox River. And the first centralized hydroelectric plant in the United States is in downtown Appleton on Vulcan Street. Go visit it. It's mind-boggling. 1882. Now this is just 120, 121 years ago. Not that long ago. The Wright brothers, Dayton, Ohio. First human-powered flight, 1903. And 68 years later, we're driving on the moon. The Wright brothers, by the way, were incredibly ingenious people. And they had the kind of ingenuity that we're going to need to make this energy transition that we and our children are going to have to make over the next 30 or 40 or 50 years. Doesn't matter who the president is or how many countries we invade. This energy transition is a given, and the only question is whether we do it elegantly and fluidly, or whether we do it sort of violently and repressively and drag our feet along the way. Wright brothers, bicycle mechanics, neither one of them had a college degree. In one winter, they figured out all the fundamental principles of aerodynamics that were used to bring my plane that I flew on yesterday from Colorado to Wisconsin. Brilliant people. Since 1900, the world economy has grown 40-fold. It's 40 times bigger now than it was then. CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide emissions have grown 17-fold. Global population is up 5 times. We're just on a rocket ship. It's been a spectacular journey. And it has all these wonderful elements, all these magical elements. You know, I once drove a pickup truck to Patagonia. You know, I mean, I don't know why I did that, but, you know, it was only 60 years ago that the first man flew across the Atlantic. You know, you can get in your car tonight and be in Britain tomorrow morning. You know, Amelia Earhart was famous for trying to fly around the world in 1935 or 36. You know, Magellan, first man to sail around the world. Well, now in America, every man is Magellan. Every woman is Amelia. We have this kind of blessed mobility, which again can be a curse. But it's a blessing. I mean, it's enriched my life enormously, having access to the kind of energy that we typically take for granted. This civilization that we've constructed now is just, it's probably the most complicated flying machine human beings have ever put together. And to describe the energy flows in the United States right now, to keep this thing aloft, to keep us on the move, to keep the whole smash going, takes about 1 million British thermal units per person per day. That's the energy equivalent of about 8 gallons of gasoline per person per day, or 100 pounds of coal per person per day if we convert it all to a single fuel. Carl Sagan said, "We've arranged a civilization in which most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We have also arranged things so that almost no one understands science and technology. This is a prescription for disaster. Sooner or later, this combustible mix of ignorance and power is going to blow up in our faces." You can say exactly the same thing about energy systems. Most Americans take them all for granted, and our energy providers encourage us to do that. You know, a typical baby boomer is going to travel 1 million miles in their lifetime and never think twice about it, never think that they're doing anything out of the ordinary. It's equivalent to 40 trips around the planet. We've all become astronauts. When the Challenger spacecraft was re-entering a few months ago, there were these astronomers that were watching it through telescopes out in California. I don't know if you saw any of this stuff on the internet, but there were these little tiles coming off, or pieces were coming off way before it got over Texas. As it came over California, these little pieces came off and then kind of receded off to the side of it. And they started calling NASA, and it was, you know, quickly, I mean, when the whole thing came apart over Texas a few minutes later. It's clear to me that little pieces of this very complicated flying machine that we've assembled with enormous hard work and enormous investment are now coming off. And the signals are just everywhere. We have Alan Greenspan fretting about next winter's natural gas prices. We just fought the second oil war in the last 12 years. We're importing 60% of our petroleum and close to 20% of our natural gas. And climate scientists say that the last decade was the warmest, from 1990 until 2002 was the warmest decade in the last 1,000 years. The whole world in 1950, at the end of World War II, was running on 10 million barrels a day of oil. We in the United States are now using 20. After 9/11, we learned all about these exotic tribes in Afghanistan, the Pashtuns and the Uzbeks and the Tajiks. You know, and I started thinking about this. I said, you know, Americans, we're an exotic tribe. We're the oil tribe. We're the oil tribe. Who's bought gasoline in the last week? I have. Okay, I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty, because it's long past that point. We need to be responsible and not worry about the guilt thing. We are now using in the United States 140 pounds of petroleum and petroleum products per person per week. We're consuming our body weight in oil products each week in the United States. It's a fascinating phenomenon. 200 million times each week an American goes into a gas station to get a tank full of gasoline. This is the great American ritual. More people do that than go to church on Sunday or watch Monday Night Football. It's what all of us now have in common. Most of us are driving the distance equal to driving to the moon every 20 years now. Some of you have cars that have 200,000 miles on them. I have an old Volvo with 240,000 miles. It's been to the moon. It's not going to make it all the way back. So let's think about U.S. oil. We were enormously blessed with oil. If we have a six-pack to represent all the oil that will ever be produced in the United States, okay, this is all the oil that's ever going to be produced in the United States from 1859 until we run out in probably 50 or 60 years of our own petroleum. 4 of these cans are now empty. Okay, one of them we knocked off just before World War II. The next one we finished around 1965, 1978 or 79, and the fourth one we finished about 1998. So here's the dilemma. We have 2 full cans of oil left of U.S. domestic petroleum. The 300 million of us, we're having children and grandchildren. How are we going to share this between this generation and all future generations of Americans? Have 2 cans left, and neither of them is a Pabst. Is that a local beer? What's the story on Pabst? Is that a kind of a high quality local microbrew or?
It ain't Torberg.
So most of the world's oil has already been found. It's in the Middle East. It's in 5 countries in the Middle East. It's owned by Muslim men. And so there's this enormous tension now. And we've seen it, this year, we saw it 10 or 11 years ago, how this oil gets distributed, who controls it, how it's apportioned. It's a religious tension. It's a cultural tension. It's an economic tension. It's just fraught with peril. And we've got 200,000, 150,000 young Americans in Iraq right now. Gary Hart, who is a former senator from Colorado, said something interesting last week. He said, people ask me how long we'll be in Iraq. I tell them 50 years. They look at me like I'm crazy. I say, hell, we've been in Korea 50 years. He's right. Oil provides about 40% of U.S. energy. Natural gas now provides about 25%. And Greenspan I've been trying to learn about natural gas because we're doing a lot of gas drilling in my part of Colorado. And these gas rigs are fascinating to go out onto. My favorite one had a big bumper sticker on the side of this gas rig out there. There are about 1,000 of these rigs in the United States. It said, Earth first. We will drill the other planets later. Most new homes are now heated with natural gas. Most of your hot water is heated with natural gas. Americans in our history, we've used more natural gas than the rest of the world combined. If we stop drilling today and we stop drilling for a month, U.S. gas production would fall by 30%. We're seeing very steep decline rates in new gas wells in Texas and Louisiana. We're now the world's largest importers of natural gas. And oil we can bring in from 30 nations around the world. We use more of Canada's oil than the Canadians do. We use more of Mexico's oil than the Mexicans do. Same thing is true of Venezuela, Nigeria, so on and so on. But natural gas, North America is an island. Natural gas is much more difficult to ship. We do ship some of it, but only 1% comes in as liquefied natural gas, which needs to be cooled to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. So unlike oil, North America is this island with respect to natural gas, and the Mexicans don't have any. The Canadians, it turns out, have, quite a lot. And so the implication here is clear. North Korea can wait. Homeland Security demands we invade Canada. Have we got some Canadians here? Yeah, there. Yeah. This is fascinating to me. I mean, our studies suggest we've used half of the natural gas that's ever going to be produced in the United States. So the conventional natural gas is already gone. It's history. We've burned it. And that's why gas prices are likely to be one reason gas prices are likely to be much higher next year than they have been over the last 10 years. Which actually is good news in many ways. Just briefly, a few words about coal, and then I want to talk about renewable energy. Coal is this remarkable thing. Here's a big chunk of coal. Coal provides most of the electricity in the United States comes from burning coal. And I think that's true here in Wisconsin, Nick?
74% of our electricity comes from coal.
Okay, 74%. This is what the human edifice is really resting on. Okay, this is what launched the Industrial Revolution. Coal's quite an interesting thing. This is very hard coal, by the way, and it's, coal's 50 to 100 to 150 million years old. Rocks that burn, stones that burn. Chinese have been mining it for a couple thousand years. They used to have shifts in the Chinese coal mine, and a single shift would last up to 40 days. They would send men into the mines, and they would live there for 40 days, digging this out, crouched over. If you've seen the movie October Sky, I don't know if any of you saw that movie, in a coal mining town in Pennsylvania.
West Virginia.
West Virginia. Wonderful line in there that, you know, coal is America, the miner says to his son. And if coal stops, America stops. This was literally true in the 19th century, in the early part of this century, and coal is still providing more than half of U.S. electricity. The poets kind of understood this energy transition before regular people did, I think, and Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "Coal is a portable climate. It carries the heat of the tropics to Labrador." James Watt whispered in the ear of mankind his secret, that a half ounce of coal will draw 2 tons a mile, and coal carries coal by rail and by boat to make Canada as warm as Calcutta, and with its comfort brings industrial power. Coal's cheap, it's very abundant. It's also implicated in 30,000 deaths each year because the particulates from coal lodge very deeply in human lungs. Some American, and the other thing about coal is this whole climate challenge. This is probably close to 10 pounds of coal here. When I burn this, the carbon in the coal combines with oxygen in the air to make 20 pounds of carbon dioxide, and that will stay in the atmosphere for 100 years. So every time I burn a rock this size of coal, I'm putting 10 times 2 is 20 pounds of carbon dioxide into the air. It'll be there a century, long after I'm dead. Some American utilities now produce more carbon dioxide than many nations. American Electric Power is the largest CO2 producer in the Western Hemisphere. Here in Wisconsin, I ran the numbers. Every time you guys buy $10 worth of electricity, here's the transaction. The utility company goes out and mines 100 pounds of coal, 10 times as much as I'm holding here in my hand. And they burn it on your behalf, and they produce 200 pounds of greenhouse gases. Every time you give them 10 bucks, that's what happens. Now, when we compare coal like this to a solar hot water system, it's very interesting. This hunk, if it's 10 pounds, it may be a bit less than that, will heat up 1 tank full of hot water. Okay, my solar hot water system on my house will do the same thing. All right, during the course of a day. A day like this, you'd make a frightening amount of hot water with a solar hot water system. You'd have 80 gallons of 160-degree hot water by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But here's the trick. The coal can do it once. And the solar hot water system can do it 7,000 times, 10,000 times. That's the transaction. I mean, these are the choices we're facing now. As people, as a nation, as cities, as counties, as local governments, where are we going to get this stuff from? Renewable energy it's really different than fuel. Fuel has a magic and it has a seductive quality, and I would argue that oil is much more addictive than crack cocaine. Much more addictive. Because Mick is a good demonstration of this. Mick used to be a crackhead before he got into renewable energy. We got him off crack. We got him a good job. He's doing the Lord's work. Okay? Once you've been exposed to motion and speed and mobility, God, it's really wonderful stuff, isn't it? It's really wonderful. I mean, that adds so much to our lives, I think, those sorts of things. And when oil's providing all the mobility on the planet, with the exception of people walking and bicycles, it's pretty easy to get addicted to this stuff. So fuels, this concentrated energy where nature's giving you something that, and put 100 million years worth of work into it and just handing it to you if you can go dig it out of the ground. They have an appeal. They have a seductive power. They're inexpensive. Some of them are abundant. And renewable energy is a different kind of thing. And we're a little divorced from it. And the beauty of a fair like this is it's bringing people back in touch with sunlight and grass and flowers and trees and flows of energy, which are always going to dwarf fuels. Flows are much bigger than fuels. The sunlight hitting all these people outside the tent right now left the sun 8 minutes ago. That's hitting his hat. or this man's face, or that woman's body. It's traveled 93 million miles in 8 minutes. It's hauling ass. And it's not just a good idea, it's the law. Somebody wrote, humanity has a method of converting sand into a semiconductor material that can take in sunlight, convert its energy to electricity, our highest form of useful energy, and do it without motion, pollution, or making a sound. We'll never run out of it. Its efficiency will only go up. Its cost will only go down. Some people would ask, in terms of our energy future, why are we working on anything else? Wind energy is another form of solar energy. And wind is now the world's fastest growing energy resource, hand in hand with solar power. And at a good wind site with today's natural gas prices, wind power is now the cheapest form of new electricity in the United States. And this is likely to be true for the next 10 years. It's likely to be true for the next 100 years, quite likely to be true for the next 1,000 years. We have a winner. We have two winners. We have more than two winners. Geothermal, biomass. I mean, there's lots of forms of renewable energy. We're going to be planting wind turbines like they were trees. By the time my kids are 20, I mean, we're already doing that. The Europeans are doing that. They're going offshore right now. The business is just exploding. Solar is growing so fast, I mean, the manufacturers can hardly keep pace with it. But both of these industries are still quite small in global terms, and they need to be scaled up. They need markets. They need buyers. They need you guys. They need all of us. They need cities, governments, states, nations. Let me just end with a few words about what you can do. The first thing I think is to celebrate energy. Okay, don't worry about what kind of car you're driving or how old your house is or, you know, the fact that you drove a pickup truck to Patagonia or whatever. Celebrate energy. The English poet William Blake said, energy is eternal delight. He was spot on the money. I mean, energy is what we love about being alive. Another important thing, I compared the United States economy a little bit to the Challenger, and I think it's important to recognize, this is what's blown me away, nobody is in the cockpit of this thing that we call the U.S. Energy system. Nobody's flying it. Nobody's keeping an eye on the gauges. You know, there are a bunch of lobbyists in there kind of jostling for control of it. But nobody's, I mean, these fundamental things that we ought to know as a people, nobody's keeping track of it because there would be all these blinking lights going off in the cockpit. One of them would say, Texas no longer produces enough oil to run Texas. Texas was one of the world's top 10 oil provinces. They now have to import $5 billion a year worth of oil into Texas. In a rational society, this would be like, hello? The landing gear is not down yet. You need to bring some motivation to this. You need to bring some desire to it. And that motivation to making changes in your home, your car fleet, the way you think about energy, the political groups you support, that motivation can come from any number of places. It can come from an ethical place. It can come from a spiritual place. It can come from a religious place. It can come from an economic place. You just want to save some money. You know, my family are Mormons, and this is kind of a strange religion. I don't know if you know much about Mormons, but you know, the thing is with Mormons, you're not allowed to drink Coke or coffee, but you can have 3 or 4 wives. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Sort of caffeine-free fornication is blessed. I don't mean to make fun of Mormons, but I mean, really, there's plenty of motivation you can bring to this, and everyone's different. Find something somewhere in your heart, your pocketbook, your soul. I mean, find traction. You need a place to act from. And then finally, get started. You know, learn about your own energy use, figure out what you can do to reduce it, use energy more efficiently, reacquaint your kids with the off switch. You know, there's so much to do. I mean, I looked at my house 5 or 6 years ago, and I had to agonize, should I buy a solar hot water system? Well, what's the payback? You know, I did all this stuff. I got the pencil out, and, you know, I just was dragging my feet. And we put a solar hot water system on this house, a photovoltaic system on this house, and we're saving 15,000 pounds of greenhouse gases each year that previously were going into the atmosphere are now being saved. It's the best investment I've ever made. You know what? I mean, buying it. There's so much we can do. I mean, I met a guy from Denmark about a month or two ago. They've selected an island in Denmark called Samso, and it's been selected to be the first renewable energy island in the whole nation. And you know, I don't know what you know about Denmark. I've never been there. I'm just dying to go. 5% of the people in Denmark own shares in utility wind turbines. They get a check from their utility company. You know, what a concept. You know, 100,000 families owning shares in a neighborhood wind turbine. You know, we can do that in Wisconsin. If something's been done, it can be done. It's as easy as installing a sprinkler system or something. I mean, after I did it, I just was astounded. Why did that take me so long? Why did I want to buy another 7,000 or 8,000 kilowatt hours each year of coal-fired electricity to run my hot water heater and to run my lights and stuff? There's a political piece here. A gal that I admire in the Powder River Basin, her motto is fight till hell freezes over, then fight them on the ice. You know, I come from a political family, and we've had an enormous political failure, policy failure. There's plenty of blame to go around. It's not just the Republicans. The Democrats haven't been a whole lot better. But there's been an enormous political failure in the United States over energy issues. It's just outrageous. I mean, we need a little baby up here. I mean, the key prop, the prop I really need is a tiny kid. You know, because what we're doing, I mean, it's really, when you come right down to it, we've got an energy policy. It's basically a value system masquerading as mathematics. Okay? And the value system says the earth doesn't matter, the future doesn't matter, your kids don't matter. The only thing that matters is how cheap it is today. You know, and it's... let me just end. You've got a great writer here in Wisconsin, a guy named Aldo Leopold, wrote a beautiful book called The Sand County Almanac in the early 50s. And Leopold's whole pitch was, we need a land ethic. Okay? And I think over the last 50 years, we've begun making some progress in that direction. But what we are desperately in need of right now, and just beginning to articulate, is the need for an American energy ethic. And it's got to start at meetings like this. It's got to start with action and hope and conviction, and it's got to start with you. Thanks for your time. Yeah, if you want to do one or two, that's fine. It's up to you.
We've we've got time for about 2 questions before, actually nobody's in here after this, but before the next workshop starts. By the way, if you're moving off to workshops, don't forget that there's another half of the fairgrounds on the other side of the Quonset huts where the vendors are. We've got time for about 2 questions if somebody wants to really grill Randy and stick him with something good. Go ahead, Randy.
Repeat it. Do I have any plans to get involved at the federal level? Politics, I've kind of made fun of politics. We have a joke in our family that it's a recessive gene.
Explain why it's in your family. People may not know this.
My dad was in politics, my uncle is in politics, my brother and my cousin are both congressmen, so thank God I don't need to get involved. But we do need people involved. I've come so far. I mean, this is a political failure more than anything. It's a policy failure. And I encourage people to do what they can individually, but we need much sounder energy policies. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I can get gene spliced or something. One other quick question. There are lots of great workshops this afternoon, so make sure that you hit one of those. Yeah.
Isn't it true that George Bush has solar at his ranch in Crawford, Texas?
George Bush now has solar at his ranch in Crawford, Texas, and he has solar on the White House right now. There's a new solar system on the White House. So there's hope. Thanks for your attention.